Hi folks, welcome to the I Write Radio podcast stroke videocast, Thursday's edition. I've got Stuart Lockhead with me today. Hi Stuart.
How are you doing, Norrie?
Jimmy Hutton. Hi Jimmy.
Afternoon, chaps.
And I'm Norrie Stewart. And one day I'm going to be able to say, I've got somebody else with me. We must get some guests, guys.
You're right.
Today we're going to have a quick peruse of Nicola Sturgeon's presser. We're going to have a chat about how honest and tight with their money the Tories are when it comes to their own supporters. We're going to have a mention of Douglas Ross and Ruth Davidson, the demented duo. And I think one or two other things are going to come in. I've got a sneaky feeling the Labour Party might get mentioned today.
Surely not. So
today's press conference, guys, pretty much the same as yesterday, I would suggest.
Yeah, I think we were all perhaps anticipating possibly worse figures. But the figure is 67 new infections, yeah? 39 of them in Grampian. And without, you don't need to be an expert to say, well, it certainly doesn't look as though this outbreak is calming down yet. However, there was no horrors in any of the other figures she gave out. 3 extra people in hospital at the moment, 1 extra people in intensive care, no more dead, and the R number has edged up a fraction, but that doesn't matter too much because there's so few cases in Scotland. And the figure that surprised me today was they reckon there's only 275 people in Scotland infected at the moment. So your chances of bumping into them are pretty slim.
Which is what they're looking for to get schools back. I think she needs to get somebody that's an expert in trace and test up to the podium with her to explain what the teams are looking for, what constitutes contact for the teams. I think she needs to get somebody who will stand up there and say, right, you're in contact. If you don't maintain your 2 meters, or if you're maintaining your 2 meters, you have 15 minutes contact.
I agree. I think she made 1 or 2 mistakes today whereby she tried to explain things that perhaps she didn't really know everything about, rather than simply passed it on to, after all, she had the health secretary and the chief medical officer either side of her. If it had been Johnson, he'd have passed it on straight away.
Well, I do think it would be an advantage, especially with the Aberdeen thing going on, if they actually got somebody to stand up at the press conference who could answer that question: what constitutes a contact for track and trace?
But it's worth saying that she didn't get angry with any of the journalists today, which makes a difference. She 1 or 2, she said, well, look, I don't have that answer. And I've already answered this question. But no, she didn't scalp anybody today, which was, made it less exciting for us.
Yeah. I did notice there's now a trend amongst the hyenas to go for the very personal answer.
Yes, where was that one? Yes, she's talking about her own school.
Yeah, and what would you say? Not you as a representative of the government, but, I thought she answered it quite well, I have to say. But the press are getting a bit frustrated because she's not committing to answers she doesn't have answers to, which is very unpolitician-like.
I did see something, probably social media, somewhere where it was somebody in England. I think it was a senior, Angela Rayner or some senior English Labour politician. Didn't seem to understand that there's a different education system in Scotland.
Nothing new there.
No, not really.
Nothing new there.
Nothing new there. The pass rate is up. Have you been too lenient, says the guy from the Times.
Yeah, which is basically, John Beattie tweeted about that today as well. It's a problem with education. Regardless of what the results say, every angle of the result can be attacked. You know, I mean, had they not gone for moderation, there would have been a 20% rise in the most deprived areas in exam passes.
And nobody would have believed these results.
And they would have criticised that. They're now beginning not only to criticise the fact that the results were moderated, they're now beginning to criticise the fact the results are up on last year.
Yeah.
And that makes the Scottish Government look good. Can we trust it because it makes the Scottish Government look good?
But look, my point is about the communications. I think they should have perhaps made it much clearer. Let's be honest, John Swinney's a bit droll and dry, isn't he? But they should have made it clearer that this year, before they announced the results, that this year the appeals process was going to be entirely different from any other year before, which we didn't get that message before.
Well, the only difference is you're not paying for the appeal. The appeals are free.
No, it's far more important this year.
No, I'm talking about the actual structure.
Yeah,
I mean,
they used to pay.
Yeah, yes, they did. That's why they're emphasising it's free this year, so nobody is being denied an appeal because your school can't afford to pay the fee.
And it's the only time where the people from the SQA will see your work, because prior to, and every other year, they'd have seen your work, they'd have seen the exam that you sat. They've made these awards by seeing none of your work. They've made these awards on the basis of recommendations by teachers and schools. So in the appeals process, they'll get a look at your work, and if your work's better than what grade you were awarded, it'll change.
No, I'm glad you brought up the question of paying for these appeals. This used to be an issue in years gone by, didn't it? Oh, a lot of state schools didn't put pupils' appeals forward because it would cost them money, whereas fee-paying schools obviously paid for all the appeals. And I've just said before we came on live, if you pay £20,000 a year for your child to go to a fee-paying school and they don't cheat the system to an appeal for your child, you want your money back.
Well, is cheat the system a fair appraisal?
They certainly game the system more. The private schools are far more likely to.
The fact you can afford to appeal for a far higher percentage of your pupils, which I think is the case, that fee-paying schools do put in more appeals.
Well, think of the pressure on the teachers at a fee-paying school, and the pressure on the teachers in an ordinary state school. Think of the pressure that's going to be on that fee-paying school teacher to boost the child's attainment. So it's about their job, after all, isn't it?
Well, the structure of fee-paying schools is such that their goal is to pass exams. Purely and simply, that's why it's all structured the way it is.
No, it's not. I dispute that.
Well, you're wrong.
No, it's all about the right connections, so that by the time you leave school, you've already got an internship and a job lined up in the bank.
And about passing exams, because it doesn't matter who you know. If you don't get the passes, you don't go to university.
Well, what about Prince Charles? He was known as Dumbo at school.
Yes, and he got into Oxford with the minimum entrance required.
Well, let's be honest. His laddie's not a smart cookie either, is he? He sneaked into St Andrews with some pretty shonky results.
But I mean, well, my own brother, who went to a fee-paying school, the structure for him was, if he was weak in any subject, he got extra tuition, built in. I mean, it was built into the way the school worked, and that was many years ago. But I don't think he ever actually did get extra tuition.
One of the other angles that the press brought after today's briefing, they were trying to get the First Minister to say that it was young people's fault. That the cases now in this outbreak in Aberdeen, it's obviously young people.
Sorry, we're off education now, are we?
Oh, sorry. Okay, I thought that was it. Oh, no, you're right. I'm looking at school background, but so yes, I have connected them. You're right.
Yes, it seems to be that they want the First Minister to blame the youngsters.
Sorry about that. I'm reading down for about the SQA item.
I think if we're going to go there, though, I mean, I think she dealt with that quite well in terms of pointing out quite correctly, in my point of view, that young folk are, or there is evidence that young folk in Aberdeen were being a bit daft. They were joining massive queues to get into busy pubs. No, it's not the sensible behaviour that they have asked of all of us throughout this. And it's not the behaviour that they asked of us when lockdown was eased. Basically, avoid busy places. Queuing up to get into a busy pub isn't avoiding anything.
I know. I mean, she was asked, that was the other thing, I suppose, she was asked by one of the hacks about the police and extra police being sent to Aberdeen, and will they be enforcing the new regulations? And she was very at pains to point out that it's our responsibility. She does not want to be sending the police knocking on your door. It's our responsibility to take responsibility for the things we know about this virus.
Difficult terrain.
I think there was a lot of I think there was a lot of technical stuff they did about what's going on around contact tracing and what have you in Aberdeen. You know, folk saying that some bars had been added to the list before they'd been contacted, and they were a bit annoyed about that. And what if you're a bar owner and you're a bit annoyed about something? I'm sorry if your sensibilities have been outraged by being added to a list, but you're added to the list because there were people on your premises who are contacts, and other people within Aberdeen need to know that.
I do think she missed an opportunity to emphasise the fact that it isn't the fault of the bars, it's the fault of the people not obeying the rules who go to the bars.
Aye.
And I think I've been a bit surprised she hasn't mentioned the fact that some of these bars shut voluntarily for 14 days, which I think was a fantastic community service.
The other thing
I know you do.
The other thing they wanted to know about was would pub crawls be banned, and how would that?
What an idiot question that is, eh? What an absolute idiot question that is. I mean, seriously, we're not into Freshers' Week yet. And when Freshers' Week comes about, all these wee fuds that have got all these wee posh students who charge other students to join a pub crawl, that's not going to happen this year. And if it does, Barry, lift them, put them in the slammer for a night for being absolute fuds. But it's not going to happen. But the reality is, if I choose to go on a pub crawl with a couple of pals this weekend, how can they tell I'm on a pub crawl?
Well, I would imagine if you're applying the guidance properly and making sure that everybody leaves their contact details as they come into the pub, by the time they get to 3 or 4 pubs, and will this work? That should, in theory, that would catch people going on a pub crawl.
Well, it's actually easier than that, Stuart. Each pub has its own stamp. When you go in the door, you get your forehead stamped.
That reminds me of going to a nightclub, yes, and you get stamped.
By the time you look like you've got a fringe, you can be lifted.
I like that one. Yes, you'll get a job. You'll get a job from the government.
Guys, there's things already in.
Forehead.
Sorry, Jimmy.
I said no. I said, am I allowed to stamp the chin of the person that attempts to stamp my forehead?
No, you're not.
No.
This is all part of the fight against pubs against coronavirus. There's actually infrastructure there. I mean, a lot of town centres have pub watch already. We've just thrown the nutter out. You phone the pubs round about and say, look out for the guy in the blue jacket with a machete.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's actually not as complicated as the hyena who asked the question tried to make it sound.
Yeah. And the other thing was that although she was asked to say that it was young people now that were causing the problem, because I think these photographs are the queues outside the pubs in Aberdeen, she was at pains to point out that what she meant by younger people, people between 20 and 40, she's not really talking about teenagers going out on freshers'
Yeah,
night.
I think it's the weird way that they judge young people. Is it not something ludicrous, like people between the ages of 15 and 44? Because at that point there's been, I think, 0 deaths in Scotland. No, can't it be 44? It must be 34. Anyway, the whole thing about Aberdeen smacks a bit to me. I would be ramming stats down people's throats. The press are making absolutely nothing of how effective Scotland's test and protect system actually appears to be. You know, we've got what, 4.5 million people in Greater Manchester, West Yorkshire, places like that, under lockdown conditions at the moment.
Aye, they're 4.8 million.
Aye, and the likes of Blackburn having to set up their own local test and protect thing because Circle can't provide them with as accurate and clear information as they require. Meanwhile, we know there are 50 odd cases. We know there were an extra 30 the day. We know there's now 29 pubs on this list. There's no kind of list like that for Blackburn, which has a far higher prevalence than Aberdeen's got at the moment.
Well,
I provide that information.
I do think that it would be useful for her to get somebody from Test and Trace on to explain what the parameters are, because it's an opportunity. I mean, I'm pretty sure that these journalists know exactly what the parameters are, but it's an opportunity for them to play fast and loose with the system by feigning ignorance.
No, Norrie, they really need to hire you as one of their communication experts.
Well, actually, I don't want them to. I want the Tories to hire me. I'll set up my own company and I'll only charge them 100 million for my expertise.
Are you flagging up? Are you setting up the next item?
Well, I kind of am. I'll throw in, by the way, for all you Tories listening, I'll throw in a coronavirus pub watch system for you as well. Okay. So we'll make that 150 million. Oh, and you can give me Ermin if you really want.
We dodgy Doogie Dross will be on the phone by the time we've stopped recording, mate.
So, guys, I am setting up the next wee part of the show. The Tories are being taken to court once again over shenanigans at the crossroads about PPE procurement. Stuart, yeah, want to have a bite of this one? You love the Tories.
Oh, I love the Tories. They're good fun. Yes, Julian Mon, who's a sound Guardian man, is a lawyer, and he gets crowdfunding. Maybe it's even direct funding, but he seems to manage to attract the money to take the government to court. It's certainly not the first or the second or even the third time in my
No, he did it during the Brexit thing.
Oh, I'm sure he did. Anyway, so his latest one is he discovered this company. Well, this contract that was handed out for 300 million masks by, I think it was Liz Truss's department.
It was handed to one of her advisors.
One of Liz Truss's advisors.
He owned the company.
Yes, and so these. Well, I'll pass it back to you at that point because all I could say is they weren't up to standard and it was obviously corrupt.
Yeah, £252 million contract that went through the hands of Liz Truss's advisor. He basically set up a company to then put that contract in another company's hands, took whatever cut he's taken out of it, but he's profited personally from this. And they've delivered absolutely nothing because everything that they've brought in so far has failed the tests to be capable of being used within the NHS. The kit isn't good enough.
Why?
It's not the first one. There's a list of contracts as long as your arm.
There's 3 companies that I think they're going to name in court. I've got a little bit of experience about importing stuff from China, and the excuse they use, the negotiations were with one company who then handed everything over to another company because they didn't have the banking set up for China. Now, as I say, I've got a little bit of experience importing stuff from China, and the banking's pretty straightforward. It's chaps. You send the money to another bank account in another country. It costs you money to do it, and that's the banking that you need set up to do it.
Yeah, and let's be honest, Norrie. Movement of capital isn't deliberately by its very nature.
Well, it's even more straightforward if you're dealing with somebody who wants to deal in Bitcoin. It's a personal transaction. So I do not understand why they needed that cutout, unless it was to keep somebody's name out of the equation.
The cutout was there to hide people, to hide who was benefiting from this contract, and to hide by how much they were benefiting from this contract.
But not for the first time, because as you say, there's a list of these corrupt contracts handed out. They say there's £5 billion worth being handed out like under these terms. Oh, it's an emergency and we need these things straight away, so this is why we've done it. But this particular one we're talking about, it was a classic case of a company that's never traded. You know, £100 limited company, never traded, no, and that they were awarded the contract for over £200 million.
And all the kit that they brought in, which was meant to be brought in to be used in the NHS, is of too low a standard to be used in the NHS. So
basically, they've gotten hundreds of millions of pieces of landfill, or hundreds of millions of pieces that are going to be incinerated. Because if they're no good for using in the NHS, what are they going to do? Are they going to punt them out to us?
Well, the question surely then is, if you contracted to bring in equipment that was of NHS standard that failed to reach that standard, you broke your contract, give our money back.
Use the money back, or go and get us the kit that we can actually use,
or go to jail.
There's obviously that, but I mean, it's clear that they were looking, particularly after they introduced the emergency powers, where they could just bang these contracts out left, right, and centre. It's clear that they were looking not to be caught at this, particularly in this case with Anaya, or whatever they're called, where people are making fortunes that are directly linked to cabinet ministers. But at that point, they clearly weren't expecting to get caught, and they weren't expecting the Good Law Project to jump on the back.
But who would even think like that during a pandemic?
Arrogant Tory bastards.
That for me is the real question. No, who would think, I'll get my mate to profit from this, even though people are going to die without the right PPE?
Norrie, that's exactly the people.
Norrie, you're still thinking we live in a decent country.
It's exactly the kind of people that Boris wants around him, mate. Greedy people who can easily be bought off. That's how you get to the top in today's Tory party.
Well, I can well understand boys being hard at it. You know, the Tory equivalent of pinching a pen from your work. But this is just disgusting.
Well, as I say, mate, they think they're absolutely arrogant enough to think that they were going to get away with it because they thought the emergency powers would cover them, that they wouldn't be seen doing this, and that it was a nice way to feather a few nests. Because let's be honest, getting to the very top of that particular Tory party, it's going to cost you a few quid, so you need to have money in the bank to be able to buy folk off.
Well, this is going to be a judicial review, and the Tories are intending to change the law to limit reviews of this kind.
Aye, they want to limit access to judicial review because judicial review hasn't been kind to them over the last few years.
Will they manage to do it in time to save themselves from these corruption charges?
You want me to
I very much doubt it, and there's also the possibility that, again, should they manage to do so, people could then apply for judicial review up here because they can't change access to judicial review in Scots law. They're trying to, but at the moment they've not found a way to do it.
Well, that's interesting. I would have, if you hadn't said that, Jimmy, I was going to say, well, I would bet on them shutting that door to democracy and judicial freedom before anything happens bad to these people. But
it kind of is one of the vital checks and balances. You know what? That any government still has to obey the law, and by trying to cut off access to judicial review, they are trying to overstep the mark, I think. But they have a parliament that very well may rubber stamp it. That's why I had to stuff quite so many peers into the House of Lords a couple of days ago as well, just last week, wasn't it?
It's 35 or 36. What about I gather there is one of the bench at the Supreme Court. She's quite delicate, and she might need a replacement. Is that still free of political corruption? The appointment of a replaced Supreme Court judge?
Well, at the moment,
judges pick the judges, do they not?
They usually do, yeah.
I'm not 100% sure about that, but I would be very surprised if it was in the gift of Boris.
At the Supreme Court, the UK Supreme Court's always got a few spares as well. I think there's 13 justices and usually only 7 sit in any case. So,
How many are Scottish?
I think there's 2 at the moment Scottish, mate.
That's fair enough. Can we kind of move on, but stay round about the same subject? I believe you guys know about this. I don't. Douglas Ross and Ruth Davison bumped into each other, I believe, about 4 days ago.
Apparently 4 days before Jackson Carlaw stepped down, because obviously it was Jackson's decision, as Ruth clearly stated last night on television whilst looking a bit furtive. But turns out Ruth went to pay Douglas Ross a wee visit. Now, apparently, according to Ruthie, this is purely personal, nothing to do with politics. She just wanted to drop in to see her pal 180 mile away. So it kind of smells a wee bit. I don't know. What was it Salmon's lawyer said? Has a bit of a smell upon it.
And then she was asked point blank by Martin Geiser yesterday on TV. Had she discussed this with Douglas about his appointment and, Jackson Carlaw's resignation beforehand? And she said, as Jimmy said, she looked sideways and said no. Martin Geiser, the interviewer, said 2 minutes before Douglas Ross came forward. The whole thing is just corrupt as, again, what on earth have we got in this country?
I mean, it doesn't matter to me whether Jackson Carlaw jumped or was pushed. It doesn't matter. I mean, I would be surprised if he wasn't pushed, because that's the Tory way. Why are they embarrassed about it?
They're biased, but they're only embarrassed because they're caught out in the lie, mate. Bruce Davidson both of them now have started with outright lies. Ruth's been caught lying to Martin Geisler, and Douglas Ross lied about the Edinburgh Agreement and Nicola Sturgeon signing up to a once-in-a-generation referendum.
But as lying becomes so habitual, they're even doing it when they don't have to.
Yes.
But it's not just the lying. The fact is that what she's denying is that she plotted to get rid of Jackson Carlaw.
But that's what Tories do. Men in grey suits, the 2022 committee. That's how Tories oust leaders. Why be embarrassed about it?
Because they didn't want it to be seen as such this close to an election. They wanted it to be seen. It was an honourable decision by an honourable Tory leader who felt he wasn't the man for the job. So he stepped aside and they instilled another honourable Tory.
The only reason that I can see for them to be embarrassed is if the orders came from London.
Well, I think it's an absolute cert, given that Boris popped up to visit Douglas Ross's constituency and had Douglas Ross in the front row of that ludicrous picture that they took at Baxter's.
The one that looked like Reservoir Dogs, was it?
Aye.
They had
Reservoir Dogs, if they'd all pissed their brakes before getting a 40 maybe.
Well, that's the only reason that it's a problem for them. If the instruction came from London and they obeyed the instruction, if it was homegrown bit of backstabbing is the Tory way.
No, no, it wasn't homegrown. It was definitely from London. As you said, Jackson Carlo was in the back row, Douglas Ross in the photograph, Douglas Cross in the front row. If this was the Chinese Politburo, we'd be saying for sure, if you're on the front row, you're favoured.
Aye, but the point I'm making is, having lied about it is the proof that that it was the case it came from London.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, as I say, mate, they're trying to project Douglas Ross as a new face, a fresh face, a new way of doing things for the Scottish Tories. And clearly what you've got is the exact same ways the Tories have ever done anything. They stabbed Jackson Carlo in the front as well as stabbing him in the back, but they didn't want to be caught out doing the stabbing.
He's stuck his foot in his mouth already. He's already made his first boo-boo. Because
I'll tell you what, I've seen him running the line at football matches, and he's never ever struck me as a contortionist. But there you go, he's managed to stick his foot in his mouth and his head up his arse all at the one time. That takes some day, and that does.
No, he said on camera, "I hope to lead a strong, united Conservative Party which will provide that scrutiny and opposition to the SNP." So he's got no ambitions of actually winning the election next year, which is the first thing of the leader of any political party. They never admit they're only going to be in opposition.
I think we...
yes, we remember the Liberal Democrats. Sorry.
Aye. I was going to say, it also kicks into, was it Lesley Riddoch's piece about him being the next Jim Murphy? Because Jim Murphy was prone to the odd wee gaff like that.
Well, Jim Murphy went from being the next... In fact, was he not going to be Prime Minister? Or was that just in his head?
He was just going to be First Minister, of course.
To begin with. And then, lost 40 seats at Westminster?
Aye, lost 40 MPs in one election, which is... No wonder he's expunged that from his record, but he's probably expunged it from his memory as well, the bold Jim, because he really liked his cell at one point, that laddie. I'm surprised he didn't lick his cell at every opportunity.
Is this... are the positions that the opposition parties at Holyrood find themselves in, is it healthy?
What do you mean?
I know we love it. I know as independent supporters, we like to see the Unionists suffer. But is it healthy for Holyrood?
Well, look, sometimes you turn around and look at, say, a foreign country and where there's only one party. Now, some countries, you've got like Putin, who's hardly got any opposition at all, even within his party. But you look at China, and although they all voted sort of 3,029 to 1 in an important vote, you must suspect there's a huge opposition within the party. And sometimes that's what obviously goes on even in this country, when we all suspect there's quite a big opposition against the SNP because it's got so big and powerful.
Aye, it's ludicrous, some of the things that people just assert in this nation of ours. You know, how many times have we heard that the SNP's a cult? The SNP's a cult because you wouldn't vote against them. Excuse me, people are voting for them, not choosing not to vote against them.
But what's that famous
and then
saying
you get this nonsense but you get this piss about a one-party state. How can a minority government possibly be a one-party state?
But you know what
it just defies belief.
But you know what they say about in politics? You keep your friends, your enemies close.
Your friends close, your enemies closer.
Yeah.
That's the one. I mean,
no, the other way around.
I mean, you look at Russia, every time they keep telling us, Putin's corrupt, he's this, that, he's the next thing. Fair play to him. He deals with the opposition in a very ruthless manner, I'll say that, but there's always opposition. I mean, his jails are fully opposition leaders. And yet our press would have you believe that there's no opposition in Russia. There's plenty, because they keep getting bloody arrested, and the BBC are reporting about it.
One of the reasons I posed the question is the schisms that are appearing within the SNP. Is that a byproduct of bad opposition at Holyrood?
Well, I would say certainly for the Labour point of view, yes, because the Labour opposition, their best talent are probably now members of the SNP, and they're creating divisions within the SNP because folk joined the Labour Party. A lot of them joined the Labour Party because they've seen it as a career. They've seen the job opportunities in Scottish Labour over the years. Now all these people, all these carpetbaggers, they're coming to one party and one party only, and I don't think that's very healthy for us.
That's a very useful summary, Jim.
You do wonder though that, I mean, there's seriously on the Tory benches as well though, because you wouldn't get many Tory carpetbaggers that decide to join the SNP. But you wonder where Tory talent has disappeared to. Because let's be honest, Douglas Ross said the other day he was looking to lead a strong team. What strong team at Holyrood's he going to lead? Every single one of their members at Holyrood was deemed too useless to even apply to be the leader.
I do think it's always been the tradition with the Tory party that they would go to Westminster if they had any talent, rather than Holyrood.
See, that's where Ross Thompson got it wrong, mate. He went to Westminster looking for talent rather than because he had talent.
Oh, here.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Let's not even get into Aberdeen politics, because I gather there's an independent senior councillor in Aberdeen being sticking her toe in upper bottom.
I think that's the case for the Labour Party as well, and it's been a huge advantage to the SNP choosing to put most of their talent into Holyrood.
I think
it's made them look possibly better than they really are.
You could be right, mate. I mean, you look back in the 2011 election, and folk weren't really expecting that, but that did bring in quite a lot of young people, as did the 2016. I mean, you've got the Justice Secretary, who, I'll be honest with you, up till about a year ago, I was pretty impressed with, but he seems to have turned into Calamity Jane this last year or so. But Kate Forbes, there's a lot of decent young talent on the benches. I think that's why quite so many of them are stepping down at next year's election as well, because they're looking at the Unions coming up and thinking, oh, hold it, wait a minute, I better just take my pension here because I'm not bouncing any higher. I
do think it's a problem for a successful party is renewal of talent. And I think the SNP need to have a long, hard look at how they continue to renew their talent pool.
But looking back at Douglas Ross, and Lesley Riddoch wasn't kind to him, comparing him to Jim Murphy. Do you know Jim Murphy? We just mentioned the other day, he's removed from his CV the time that he was leader of the Labour Party in Scotland. I wonder why. I actually thought that Lesley Riddoch came up with quite an interesting point. I think she's identified the sort of strategy that the Tories could be looking for. If you recall where not Douglas Johnson went to, he went to Orkney and he went to the north of Scotland, outside the central belt. You know, that is always an argument in Scottish politics. Oh, we're ignored because we're no longer in the central belt. Well, the way that Lesley Riddoch describes what the kind of policy might be based on, fluffing up a thin Unionist prospectus, trying to tap into public dislike for remote central government without intending to change anything, expecting that wide-eyed rural Scots will be mightily impressed with rehashed city deals and free ports. Hell, maybe Elgin, Ullapool, St Andrews and Stranraer will get full-time elected provosts.
It's an absolute pile of
No, but it is a direction that you could see. They play to that a lot of the time.
He's already went there. Did you know? Listen to his speech.
Oh, I know. I heard what they said. Johnson said.
But no, it's exactly what Douglas Ross said in his interviews yesterday, that he wanted to devolve power away from the central belt. It's abject nonsense. It's the exact same divide and conquer, divide and rule nonsense that Tories have been doing for the last 300 years. Well, do you think for a second a Conservative gives a damn about people in Orkney?
Well,
of course they don't.
But they want to split off Orkney and Shetland because of the oil.
That's exactly it. They want to tell you that it's Shetland's oil and Shetland wants to be separate from Scotland. They'll then tell you that people in the Highlands didn't want people in Holyrood making decisions for them. Well, I'll tell you what.
It's much simpler than that, guys. It's Labour Party are at it as well. They want to devolve power down from Holyrood to councils because they still have some control in councils.
Yeah, but
it applies both to the Tories and the Labour Party. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to strip power from Holyrood to where they can wield that power.
There has been, apparently there was a little detail on what Lesley Riddoch said. She said that the suggestion was that the money would go direct to boards, which would be local councillors and other unelected officials from different
they
public figures.
They want their hands back on power. They can't get it via Holyrood, so they're going to get it at the level below Holyrood.
And they didn't want elected power because they can't, like you say, they cannot win elections. So now they're talking about boards. I'm sorry, did Scotland not have a massive problem with quangos the last time the Labour and the Liberals held any power in Scotland? Every few weeks we were hearing about this quango or that quango that had made a James or something.
Aye, but quango's bad when in government. Quango's good when we don't have power.
Aye.
And it's about power. And
we're looking
that's controlling the funding.
Aye, and we're also looking at some of the quangos that they set up that are causing all kinds of problems now. The National Trust for Scotland, they didn't exactly set it up, but they didn't do anything to reform it in all of the time that they had power. And it's now keeping Bannockburn shut, for example. The health boards, we have major problems with these health boards because they don't want the level of interference from a Holyrood government that they're now receiving. They were quite happy when Labour and the Liberals were running it because they could keep them at arm's length.
Interesting, and worth keeping an eye on because it's another part of the power grab. Perhaps the best way to describe what they're talking about is a power drain.
Well, it's a pincher movement, isn't it? The power grab coming from Westminster on one side, and you've got the power grab suggesting that power gets dragged down a level.
I think there might be unforeseen consequences, having said that, for the Tories and the Labour Party if they do go ahead with that, because I think it might just rejuvenate that groundswell in the SNP to get mayor councillors in.
Well, you'll forgive me, mate, but we three all live in Edinburgh, and I didn't think we'd want to see the City of Edinburgh Council being given any more power over our daily lives than they've got at the moment, would we?
No, I don't think so. Have we anything to finish with?
Well, we've not had a pop at the deputy leader of the Labour Party in Scotland yet.
Bomber Baillie.
Oh, of course. Tweeting.
Particularly twatty tweet suggesting that the outbreak in Aberdeen was a ruse to take away attention from the SQA scandal, as they were wanting to call it. And I mean, she retweeted from somebody else who's clearly a bit of a horse's arse and who's I'm not allowed to use that phrase, am I? Sorry. He's clearly an ass. He's an ass rather than a horse's one, and his tinfoil bonnet was clearly a bit too tight. But
I tell you what, he's not very smart.
Yes, that's the chap. And clearly his tinfoil bonnet had shrunk once he put it on his head. He must have gone too close to his microwave when he was making his gruel or something. But either way, Jackie Baillie decided to retweet this nonsense, and it actually gained some traction, which is frightening. It just shows you how many absolute clowns with oversized feet are following Jackie Baillie on Twitter.
Can I claim some credit for this with my dead lion thrown on the table yesterday? I actually didn't think anybody would be stupid enough to suggest that the Aberdeen lockdown was cover for the Scottish Government's education policy mess.
I'd agree with you, mate. I looked at it and thought, no, surely no. I mean, when you take a look at Twitter, and particularly some of the Fruit Loops for Scotland that are on Twitter, you're like, you can go any kind of conspiracy theory you want, but for an actual sitting MSP, and not just an MSP, but one who will probably be leader of one of the three parties after the next election, because as sure as my arse points south, Richard Leonard's getting the sack the day after that election.
Stuart.
Oh no, I don't want to resell it. I don't want to give this guy any more publicity than he's already had. As I said before we went on air, at one point we thought he was Brian Spanner. He's regularly so foul with his posts. He's even worse than Brian of the West Highland Free Press, or the other Brian, I think he was a former MSP, Tory MSP. Why are the Brians so bad? There's quite a extreme unionists, shall we say?
You've got a few. You've got Wilson. You've got Monteith. You do wonder if people called Brian got taken aside in primary school and kicked up and down the playground when the rest of us were away home or something.
I wonder if it's got anything to do with the Monty Python movie, Life of Brian.
Possibly, mate. Possibly. He's not Brian Spanner. He's just a very naughty boy.
Well, I'll give you. It's maybe not funny, but it's a wee tidbit you may have missed. That Patrick Harvey, one of the co-convener of the Greens MSPs in Holyrood, has resigned as an honorary ambassador. Correct me if I'm not exactly wrong, of the National Secular Society, because he's no happy. Because apparently the National Secular Society are not very keen on this new hate crime bill that's coming down the line, and Patrick's all in favour of it.
Right. Okay. Because Patrick wants to be able to jail people who upset him.
Mate, he'd be jailing all the salesmen at Slater's. I hear he absolutely spat the dummy when they shut the boys section. Because clearly he gets all his suits half price.
No, I don't know. I only had a drink with him once. I think you were there, Norrie, weren't you?
Aye.
He seemed nice enough, but I think Hotherall might have been there as well.
Yep, Botherall was there. Aye, there was a few. Well, they weren't really Kent faces at that time, were they?
No. And then
we become Kent faces.
And then we've actually had Hotherall around this table, along with Kevin Williamson, Ian McGill.
Aye, I hate to say it. That's a Tory I like. I like Ian McGill. Yeah, he's prepared to laugh at himself.
Yes.
Oh, guys, you weren't watching Channel 4 News last night, were you?
I think I did.
They went to Alex Massey for a comment on something at his house. There's a man that hasn't had a good lockdown. Jesus, he looks like he should be sitting on that bench at the foot of the walk, drinking a couple of cans of McEwan's Expert.
Well, not had a haircut yet, maybe, is it?
He needs a haircut, a shave, and a wash more desperately than any man in Scotland right now.
The late Alex Grant and I bumped into Mr. Massey in a pub in Leith, watching rugby, and we had quite a good conversation with him. And then Alec went full indie mad on him, and he felt obliged to leave our company.
That sounds like that would have made it for an interesting afternoon sesh.
He scrubs up a lot better than his appearance when he's drinking.
Right.
I don't know if he's still in Leith. He had a flat on the wall.
I think he lives in Edinburgh, but he's got roots in Selkirk.
Yes, he's a Selkirk man, yeah. Selkirk cricket fan.
Mm-hmm. And the football club as well, I think. Oh, no, that's another friend of mine, the Selkirk Football Club. Never mind.
Selkirk have got a football club?
Yes.
Oh, I need to put a stop to that. Soccer in Selkirk. I'll need to have a word with my mate, John Rutherford. Okay, guys, I think we'll call it a day at that. Thanks very much for being on. Stuart Lockhead, Jimmy Hutton.
Bye-bye.
I'm Norrie Stewart. Remember, tomorrow's Hat Friday, folks. Don't forget to wear your hat. And we'll see you all tomorrow. Thanks for listening. Cheers for now.